Well, Aisha Fundi's story is so painful to listen to, asking so many questions about things that could have resulted in a different outcome. It's one of a kaleidoscope of perspectives of what went wrong in the time preceding that tragic event. I want to bring in my colleague, Bongiwe Zwane, who put together a very special look back on the events of that time. And here's an excerpt of her special reportage, which she compiled with our Full View team, which will be aired on Monday.
It's been 10 years since this dark moment in South Africa's history. Television cameras were rolling when the first group of striking miners were gunned down. Others died behind the copy in what lawyers say were executions. Mine worker Jackson Lehupa was shot 11 times during what has become known as Scene 1. His death robbed his 6 children of a father.
I was his baby girl, because it's the 6 of us. If 5 it's boys, I'm the only girl. He would kill for me. He would kill. But sometimes no must not go like say, not saying that he didn't love but he would just say nje ukuthi anginandaba nabafana noba ngalala ehlathini noba in but not mntanami intombazana.
Very hard, Bongiwe, not to be emotional as you reconnect just with the humanness of the robbery of each life and each family in that tragedy. Before we get into the interview proper, just share with us what it was like going back to the community there and interacting with the survivors and the victims' families.
Good evening, Aman, and good evening to the viewers. Going back was hard. I don't want to lie, it was hard. As a journalist, it's hard. As a human being, it's hard because the pain is still fresh. It's like the 2 days after the tragedy when I arrived in Marikana and I met widows for the first time who wanted answers. Some of them were expecting answers from me and asking me how are they going to know whether their husbands have died or alive. It's the same thing. It was going back to widows that say to you, but who is going to tell us who gave the instruction for our husbands to be shot? At the same time, you speak to someone like Aisha Fundi, who Itumeleng spoke to, who says, I want to know how I got to bury my husband with missing body parts. Who was responsible for that? And those are the questions that they pose to us as journalists, Iman, and they pose to me as well. And I didn't have the answers, just like I didn't have the answers for them 10 years ago. And it's one of those times where you feel like you failed people, but at the same time, you know that it's not within your power to find these answers, but they are still looking for the answers. And Iman, now you can imagine some of them are battling with the rising cost of living. So it's compounding everything else as well.
And part of that discovery really is in the series of questions that you ask about where is the justice of accountability? Where are reparations for the families? What's the history of the delays and the court action? What can you share with our viewers just on that score in terms of bringing things to closure and accountability?
So yesterday, when we spoke to the Solicitor General on the show, he says that they're making, serious progress when it comes to this. I mean, the families have been paid out. But, Iman, one thing struck me last night when we spoke was that now widows like Aisha Fundi have been brought to the table as well. Because remember, the widows that were paid out and the families that were paid out were the families of the people who died on the 16th of August. And those who died in the days before had always been complaining. But there were other mine workers, remember, Iman, who also died on the 13th of August, and they were part of the process of compensation. So the Socio-Economic Rights Institute has been fighting for them, and they were able to get some of what they want, but there are still some outstanding matters. They want, for example, even an apology from the president. You've got mine workers that right now are battling it out in court, with government because they suffered personal injuries. You've got Mzopolo Makidiwana, for example, who was shot in his manhood and is demanding some of, the compensation, and they're not finding each other as to how much he must be paid. You've got Elungsile Madwanzi, who still walks with a bullet in his head because it cannot be removed for his own health. So these are some of the mine workers that have suffered personal injuries and are looking to, this particular process now to be able to put these matters to finality. But among those that were not part of the conversations, you think of Merilanga, for example, whose husband Julius was stabbed 18 times on the 13th of August. Those are the people that are now being represented at the table. And if the Solicitor General has his way, they may also be very well compensated, because that has always been their argument, to say, if you compensate one side, you need to compensate everybody else.
We were speaking earlier with the State Theatre Director about the Marikana musical, and he reminded us that the children who were around 10 and very young at that stage are not children anymore, and the story would have created layers of memory for them. In your interactions with the survivors' children, how are they remembering and telling the story?
They're angry, Iman. They're very angry. The two young people that we got to speak to, others I spoke to on the phone, they're angry. These are children that are demanding justice. You listen to Noeli, who we just played an excerpt of. She says that for her, she was her father's baby girl. She was the only girl out of 6 children. And she was the princess in the family, and her father did everything for her. You get to hear from Semi Choganes's son, Ndiko, who says that while the mine has put me through school, I still want to know who killed my father. Because he says that, he even makes a bold statement, Iman, saying that people are buying their way out of jail cells. And there is no justice in the country. It tells the state of justice in South Africa. These are things that you're hearing from the children. And Iman, from, listening to what Aisha Fundi was saying, you hear the same thing from the children. They say the president, the now president of the country, must come to Marikana like he's been promising in the past, that he's going to be meeting with the families, because they really would like to talk to him. They also want to feel like they matter. And Noeli even goes further to say, if the president can go to Enyobeni, what stops him from coming to the people of Marikana and speaking to everyone and really trying to get things from their perspective? And she says they're not looking to blame him, but they simply want to be acknowledged. So this is the sentiment, Iman, that has been going on for 10 years. Every year, the president gets these calls, even when you think back to when he said at Mam Winnie's funeral that he was going to take Julius Malema, EFF leader, and go to Marikana. People were hopeful that he was going to go. Now, they are still saying they are hoping that that day will come, because they really would like to meet with him.
What have been, to synthesize for our viewers who haven't been following the historical developments in this 10-year tragedy, for reasons, explanations, excuses as to why that visit hasn't happened?
Iman, your guess is as good as mine and the viewers tonight. There's been quite a lot of questions. There's been quite a lot that, we've been trying to get in terms of answers as to why he hasn't gone. But simply, sometimes you get told maybe it might not be time, but we never really get an official answer as to what's happening. The last time he was going to go for a process of atonement, and nothing has happened. And some of these family members, Iman, you think of, for example, Zamega Nungu, you think of Nongulego Ngande. These are widows, Ntombizolile Msebetsane, who say that we just want to sit around the table with him and get to understand the events of the day, but also where he is now in terms of his thinking as far as Marikana is concerned. And then you think of the families of the officers, for example, Iman, who are saying, our loved ones were killed 3 days before this tragedy, and would also like to meet with him and understand what he says and spend some time. So all the families share these sentiments, and they are hoping for some kind of answers, because even South Africans are probably still waiting to hear what is the delay, what exactly is going on there, because this is the critical missing element when it comes to this particular story, because a lot of people are still hoping to see that particular meeting take place. I mean, Iman, at first, when you would cover the first commemoration, for example, the families were adamant that they wanted him to come to Marikana. Now it has changed. They're even saying they're willing to go to the union buildings. They're willing to go to a neutral venue to meet with him. So they all say that it's up to him to make that particular meeting happen.
Bongiwe, thank you so much for going and doing that story in, with as much empathy as you have. It's going to be a tough couple of days ahead because every time we memorialize this and revisit that site of wounding in which so many questions are yet to be answered, it is a moment of deep mourning, I think, for us as a society. And again, on behalf of those families, to find out exactly what happened, what was the sequence of events, and the question you pose, who gave the order to shoot. Bongiwe Zwane, thank you very much for joining us this evening, our Full View anchor.